Hi everyone, my name is Susanna Batel and I am going to talk a bit about a paper that was just published online in Antipode by myself and Batel Devine-Wright. The main aim of this paper is to critically discuss the research on the social acceptance of large-scale, low-carbon energy generation technologies and associated infrastructures such as high-voltage power lines, which I will, for the sake of simplicity, from now on refer to as only energy infrastructures. Over the past few decades, several countries worldwide, and specifically in the global north, have been promoting renewable energy infrastructures and associated ones, such as high voltage power lines, following increasingly binding legislation in this regard and for tackling climate change. However, whereas publics at the general level do tend to agree with renewable energy specifically, when specific infrastructures are deployed, there is often local opposition to the deployment of those infrastructures. And thus, a large body of research has then developed also in the last decades on trying to understand this opposition and mainly to overcome it. However, whereas the importance of the deployment of these infrastructures is usually taken for granted at both policy and academic levels in the global north, more recently some scholars have also started to discuss its dark side, and namely in terms of environmental justice. One increasingly prevalent critique is accusing the polluting countries from the global north of environmental injustice in the guise of carbon colonialism, namely the offsetting of carbon emissions by deploying energy infrastructures in the global south. And the Desert Deck project, which we discuss in the paper, is a good and recent example of that. Another critique can be summarized as uncovering, as we've called it, energy colonialist practices. We further discuss this in the paper, but basically we can summarize this as the fact that research and the literature on the social acceptance of this energy infrastructure very rarely critically engages with the neoliberal and capitalist underpinnings of the very research itself produces and reproduces. So, in sum, as we see it, we can summarize these critiques as being related with the fact that research on the social acceptance of energy infrastructures has not considered one main aspect, which is the multiscalar nature of the deployment of these infrastructures, and specifically that issues of environmental justice in their deployment go beyond the local and the national, but are also interconnected with the global. So the main aim of this paper was really to address this neglect and generally to contribute to research on energy colonialism by focusing on how the responses of local communities to be affected by the deployment of high voltage power lines to be connected to new low carbon energy generation technologies in the UK are shaped by the multiscalar nature of these infrastructures. For that, we present in the paper some empirical examples that illustrate this and further contribute for discussing these issues, and these examples are based on data collected through 8 focus groups in the UK. The analysis interestingly suggests that the public relies on and reiterates historical narratives of Britain's colonisation practices, both within and outside the UK, to justify and legitimate opposition to the deployment of energy infrastructures in the UK and specifically near the place where they live in the countryside. In turn, this highlights how responses to energy infrastructures near where one lives are intertwined with responses to other socio-political issues. This is quite clear in the rhetoric of the far-right wing UKIP party in the UK and others like the Conservative Party, which often put side by side the need to protect our countryside with the need to keep the lights on and the need to give, and I quote from UKIP's 2015 manifesto, our country the breathing space it desperately needs, and immigration is not about race, it's about space. So in turn, people then tend to reproduce largely what is said in the political and institutional arenas and disseminated by media, and namely right-wing populist media such as The Sun, the Daily Mail and Telegraph, among others. This paper has therefore begun, in our opinion, to reveal and discuss contemporary energy colonialist practices, and namely how right-wing institutional, political, and media discourses are shaping people's ideas and practices regarding the deployment of energy infrastructures near the place where they live, in the global north, and in a way which can be considered environmentally and socially unjust to people in other places in the world. Researchers, us, and policymakers have then to further reflect about our own practices and how these are reproducing the neoliberal and capitalist system and conservative politics. I hope you will find an opportunity to read our paper anyway, and also hope you enjoyed it. We would love hearing your thoughts on it, so please do contact me at susanna.batel@iscte.pt for discussing it or with any queries. Enjoy!